Bill, thank you. We are now on.
Very good.
Yeah, and thanks for you for permitting Tom Price and Norm Price to convince you to come down here and
Indeed.
to
My
do this
pleasure.
interview. Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Okay, my parents were both in Mississippi. And they grew up there. And then my father went to the seminary. They both went to Mississippi College. Well, she didn't go because back in those, the women went to Hillman College.
Mhm.
But they met there and eventually married. My mother was a singer, and she continued singing for all her life. Had a beautiful alto voice. But anyway, in 1939, my parents went down to Argentina as missionaries.
So let me just back up. Bill, when were you born?
I was born in 1932.
1932, okay. Anybody can do the math. Today is 2024, in case you're curious, folks.
Yes. So we went to Argentina in 1939. Went by boat from New York down to Buenos Aires. And I remember when my parents had been talking about the fact that the people in Argentina spoke Spanish. And when we got off the boat and we were down there visiting with some people who had come to meet us, I asked my mother, I said, "Are we speaking Spanish now?"
So what'd your dad do for a living?
He was a minister, but he went down to Argentina to work with their seminary.
Ah, okay.
And so that's what he did all the time he was there. And I enjoyed being a part of that life. And as school went, I went to the American Grammar High School, it was known then. And that was an especially enriching experience for me because there were about 15 different nationalities in the students in the school. And so this led you to appreciate much more other countries and their traditions and the bonding that each of them felt toward their own country. And yet at the same time, since you were in there interacting with people from other countries, the importance of bonding with people from other nationalities was a crucial part of the education that I received, and one for which I am deeply grateful.
And your mom and dad, while there, your dad was he at a seminary?
At the seminary, huh?
Okay, and was he with an eye towards becoming a minister?
Me?
Oh, no, your dad.
No,
Your dad.
he was already a minister.
Already minister. What denomination?
Baptist.
Baptist, okay.
Baptist, uh-huh.
And it was your mother, was she, did it take much convincing for your mother, your dad to say, "Hey, I'm going to become a Baptist minister and we're going to travel the world"? Was she supportive quickly, or did she?
I think she was very supportive.
Yeah.
One of the things that missionaries continue to have to deal with is the fact that the people that they're coming to work with have a very strong sense of their own country.
Mm.
And they don't particularly like foreigners coming in and telling them what to do. So you have to adapt to that
Right.
environment and learn to work with other people. Part of what you confront also is the fact that, at least in that day, most of the people that you are working with have considerable less educational background than you do. So, in fact, during that day, the Argentine law required you to finish up the 7th grade, but if you went beyond that, that was up to your own initiative. Although it was free, high school and university were both free. They did not have charge tuition. And so it was a very interesting environment to be in.
So talk a little bit about what it was like to go to school, and are you in Buenos Aires? Is that where you were?
Yeah.
And so it was amalgamation of a lot of students from did they speak English or did they speak Spanish or?
It was an American school, and of course, all the classes are in English,
Okay.
except for the first 7 grades. And in those first 7 grades, in the morning, everything is in Spanish.
Okay.
And then in the afternoon, everything's in English. And once you finish that and go to high school, then it's all in English.
How long were you there?
I was there until 1950, for 11 years.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about Argentina during that time period because it's been popularized, certainly by the Broadway and movies
Oh, yeah.
and Evita.
Evita,
And my father-in-law also as a merchant marine, and then
Yeah,
right
right.
after World War II, back and forth to Argentina, spent a lot of time there in Buenos
see.
Aires. So, did you get a sense of the Juan Perón came into power right after the war?
yeah.
The politics of it all when you were going to school?
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, there was a good bit of disruption politically. From an historical point of view, when Argentina became independent in 1816, they had about 50 years of a civil war before they were able to finally get the country together. And that happened in 1865. But at that time, the way the government was set up, it was set up mainly so that the upper classes, the 10 to 15% of the top population, really exercised the political power. In the 1920s, they had another shift in their political structure and functioning, so they included the middle class. And what Perón did when he came in was he incorporated the lower 50% into the political process and made laws such that life was livable for them. They had decent wages and decent security in their employment. Of course, that was instituted after he became president in 1946. And he served that term to 1952. And during that time, he called a constitutional convention and changed the Constitution so that the president could succeed himself. Prior to that, the Constitution specified that a president could not succeed himself. He served one term and that was it. So he changed the Constitution. Then he got elected for his second term. And then 3 years later, they had an internal revolt and kicked him out.
Yeah.
But one of the things that he did as a change was to give the lower class people a good bit more financial and you might say social stability. During my last year there, 1950, they had a special park that they dedicated to the rights of the elderly. And so I went out there just to see what was going to go on. And on the process, when you got off the train, they had about a 4-mile walk up to the park. And on the process of walking, this man joined with me, and he could tell from the way I was dressed and what my manner was that I was not, as it were, a Peronista, a follower of Perón. And so he began to tell me, he says, why it was important to him. He says, the main reason was that man has given me my dignity. He's given me my place in society. And I feel like I'm now one with my other citizens. And that was a very interesting experience for me in speaking with that man, that he didn't talk about political power or anything else. He said, he's given me a sense of belonging in our society.
Was there, they seemed to be at a time when Perón and his wife, Eva, who ultimately became really very much involved in the poverty and enhancing the poverty. Did you see that as part, also your dad, when he was in the mission field and doing the mission work, did they overlap at all? It's sort of that.
Well, they didn't, but it was very obvious that one of the things that she was best known for was assisting the down and outs, and particularly with instituting certain programs that would assist them in health care and in other financial situations, and to, as it were, incorporate them into the social order so that they would benefit from being citizens in very concrete ways that would improve their lifestyle. Yeah.
The movies and the Broadway kind of note that she used the media at the time, which was radio, broadcasts.
Yeah.
Did you, were you cognizant of that?
Yes.
Did you hear that stuff?
Very much so.
Yeah.
You become very much aware of his presence and the backing that he had. In fact, there were a good many what they call demonstrations, in which there'd be large groups of people going down to the center of Buenos Aires to demonstrate in support of one thing and another. And those are fairly common occurrences during my growing up years.
Was there religious tolerance?
Yes, there was. The people who were non-Catholics, who were Protestants, as it were fairly active and had been fairly active since the late 1800s in Argentina. And the Methodists were very strong, so were the Presbyterians and the Baptists, and the Episcopal Church also was very much present in the culture in Argentina. They weren't a majority, but they were a very vibrant minority. And one of the things that, one of the impacts that those groups had was that they were working mostly with people who were on the lower fringes of society. And they tended to, the gospel that they preached was, you were not only supposed to accept God as your Savior, but you were then supposed to do something with it. You were supposed to get yourself educated. You were supposed to get yourself a good job. And so, particularly when I was able to return later, whereas the dominant economic status of the members of the church was low-level employees of one kind or another. And then when I came back 10 years later, the people that were children with me had, like I, gone to college and gotten their professional degrees, and they were now a professional class, and they weren't on the bottom rung of the social order. And so it tended to have an effect of really encouraging people to move up in the social order. And it was an interesting change to see.
As the politics were ebbing and flowing for Perón, certainly the ebbed in his favor to become president in 1946. Did that affect your ability to participate in regular life? Did you get a sense of that? There's politics and then there's religious activity.
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, first of all, as a foreigner, you didn't express your political views because that's messy in their thing and it's none of your business. So you just keep your mouth shut in terms of politics. It means you didn't have opinions and didn't discuss it with those that were comfortable discussing with, but you didn't, as it were, join in the political process, but you observed it. And it was an interesting time. It was a little bit turbulent. You had to be careful where you went sometimes. You didn't want to get caught in one of these big demonstrations because you didn't know exactly how these things would turn out. Sometimes they get a little violent. But generally speaking, those were good years in Argentina. And I really appreciated my years there. It gave me an understanding of that culture and of the people and of the changes that can occur and the fact that they have a different historical and cultural background, one that's rooted in the Spanish tradition rather than the British tradition.
During that time period, Perón's in power in 1946 for until 52, I think.
Yeah.
And post-war.
Post-war.
And he was welcoming of a variety of citizens, including the Germans.
Indeed, indeed, yeah.
And was that at all controversial that many of the Nazis were taking the advantage and the opportunity of a safe haven
Yeah.
in Argentina?
Well, that never was a publicly discussed issue. It was just assumed it was occurring. In fact, as a part of the culture, one of my best friends was a German. And his parents had grown up in Germany during the days that Hitler was coming to power. And I remember in conversation once with my friend's mother, she said, I realized that a lot of things he did were wrong. But one of the things he did was he brought stability to the economy and the culture and the politics of the country. He brought order out of the disorder that descended on Germany after the First World War. But generally speaking, in terms of the politics of the day and incorporation of people from other cultures, it was just assumed as normal. There's a certain tendency for British, when they came, to form their own sort of social identity and culture and activity. And in fact, I remember interacting with a grandmother of a friend of mine who was born in Argentina, but she had never learned Spanish because she thought it was a degenerative kind of language and she didn't need to speak it. That was a part of her British pride, you might say. But that does indicate that you have kind of British colonies within the country. You had German, you had Italian, and of course you have many Spaniards too. Of course, the Spaniards and the Italians were the dominant groups in Argentina in terms of immigration. And this was it contributed to the fact that you are open-armed and accepting people of different backgrounds. So that was a very healthy dimension to that.
Was your dad affiliated with I know he's a Baptist, was there within the Baptist religion, I'm a Baptist, a lot of congregations, was he affiliated with the Northern Baptist, Southern Baptist, was there?
Yeah, these were Southern Baptists.
Southern Baptist?
Southern Baptists, huh?
Yeah, because of Mississippi.
That's right.
That time period. And then around 1950, was he called back, or he decided, I've been here for almost 15 years, I guess?
Yeah, well, I came back to go to college.
Oh, you came back, okay.
Yeah, but he stayed there.
I see.
He stayed. He retired in 1980, I think.
Oh, so he stayed down there?
Yeah, he stayed down there, yeah.
Oh, my golly.
Yeah.
So then he saw it all.
He did, indeed. Yeah.
I just, while he was there, obviously, Evita, I went to the movie and I saw that. I got caught up in all that stuff. She dies of cancer, very young age, in her kind of early 30s. Did he ever talk about sort of the idolization of her? Because there was so much mourning and so much attention grabbed to her.
Yeah, generally speaking, there was a good bit of support for her and a good bit of gratitude toward what she had done and the work that she had brought about in Argentina in terms of improving conditions of the working class people, in terms of their health care and their other social opportunities. There was a fringe, those that opposed Perón, that did not have much appreciation for her. But as you look back on what she tried to do, she was, if anything, as effective, if not more effective than Perón himself in terms of identifying with the people and encouraging them to improve their lot and to provide opportunities to help them to do that. So.
She had a foundation, kind of the Evo Perón Foundation or something like that. How was that funded? Was it just state funded, or were there businesses that supported Perón that kind of found that as a mechanism?
Well, a little bit of both. There's a much more tendency on the part of the government to fund programs of that sort. That was viewed as much more legitimate than we would view it if the federal government comes out and say, give $50 million to the Rockefeller Foundation. We wouldn't think much of that. But for the government to support activities like that was fairly common, and it was particularly if you're in a political power, it saw to it to get money there rapidly. You didn't have to sit around and wait till you raised it. And so, in that sense, the government was much more involved in the everyday life of people in certain ways.
So your dad's there in Argentina, really, for his life.
That's right.
And did he have a church, or did he have series, did he seed other churches and sort of, kind of build a network of Baptist churches?
Yeah, the National Convention, Baptist in Argentina, was already organized when we came down in 1939. And the seminary itself was established in 1917. And so we went down in 39, so it's almost already 15 years old already. And so it was an important thing when the conservatives took over the Southern Baptist Convention in the late 70s and 80s. They withdrew their support economically from anything except what they call evangelism. And the Argentine seminary then became the responsibility of the Baptist Convention. And their work has expanded tremendously. The enrollment when the missionaries gave that over to them was 90 students, and they now have over 300.
Wow.
And then in addition to that, they have all kinds of programs that they use the internet for to work with churches. So there's much more of a presence in the country as a whole in terms of educational opportunities and broadening of vision that the seminary can now exercise than it did before.
Bill Cooper comes back at when you're 18 years old.
18.
You go back to go to college in the States. Where did you go?
I went to Baylor University.
Baylor Baptist, of course.
That's right, Baylor Baptist. And I finished a master's degree there, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I started out, but about my junior year, I sort of had an awakening experience and realized that I really needed to study philosophy a whole lot more than I had before, since it broadened my horizons and helped me to understand much more some of the radical cultural differences and heritages that I was a part of. And so when I finished there in 1955, I went to the seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. At the time, it was probably one of the better seminaries in the country. And I was there for 3 years, and then I went up to Bloomington, Indiana, and did graduate work in philosophy at Indiana University. And then when I finished there, I taught for a year at Lycoming College in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And then they asked me to come back to Baylor, and so I went back to Baylor in '65, and been there ever since.
Thank golly. While you're doing this statewide education and enhancing your philosophy and getting your degrees, your mom and dad are still in Argentina.
Yes, that's right.
Did you go back frequently?
I did. I went back once in the summer of '55 for about 2 months. And then I went back again on a Fulbright grant in '62, '63. And then once I became professionally established at Baylor, one of my specialties was Latin American philosophy. And the chairman of the department was also very much interested in that area. So almost then on a bi-yearly basis, or every other year, there would be some conference or congress in Latin America that we would go to almost every 2 years. And that enabled me to maintain some kind of contact. It was very fruitful and helpful.
Did your mom and dad have any, I mean, obviously they cast their lot as Argentinians, and about essentially leaving the United States and becoming,
Yeah?
I assume did they become citizens?
No.
So they maintained a relationship as far as citizenship.
Uh-huh.
But did they pause and have any reflection on this tremendous commitment?
Yes, one of the biggest demands, and I became aware of this later on, since for me it wasn't a demand, which is a part of growing up there, but as an adult, if you go in, the challenge is to you to identify with that culture, with its values, with its priorities, with what they're trying to struggle with. That is very demanding. And it takes a lot of effort to sort of become acquainted with the history of the country. For example, when it sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but if you really want to understand Latin America, you got to understand Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that we often don't know about Spain is that from about 700 AD to almost 1500 AD, there was a civil war going on in Spain against the Muslims. And they never did establish, as it were, they first established Spain as a whole in 1496. And so, and that was the generation that went into Latin America. So they didn't come to Latin America with an established religious heritage, I mean, or political heritage.
Right.
And so there was a matter of how do you operate in this new situation? And the Spaniards came in the early 1500s and did away with the Aztecs and did away with the Incas, who were major Indian civilizations that were dominant in a huge part of Mexico and in most of that west coast of Latin America. The rest of Latin America, in terms of indigenous population, were mostly hunters and gatherers.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have them moving into the Spaniards when they first come in, move into a situation in which they see themselves culturally as more developed than the people that they're with. And so there's an attempt to put them out of the way. But of course, as happened up here, is, well, most of those people died out from diseases that the Europeans brought that the Indians were not immune to. And so they developed their own cultures within that Spanish colonial mentality. And they've been kind of struggling with that ever since. Because one of the things that happened in most all of those countries was when they moved into their years of structuring their political identity, they mostly drew from the U.S. tradition. They looked at the U.S. Constitution and decided this is a good way to do it. But they didn't have any of the cultural support for having representative government and things of that sort. The military always had been the dominant presence. You know, they say in the prior 800 years in Spain, and it tended to be that same tradition that you have in Latin America. And in fact, it wasn't until about 50 years ago that military presence sort of began to fade as a political power.
The Peronistas, are they still a political party?
Yes, they are. In fact, they've split. They had one major split, then there's various factions within it. but there's still very much a presence in Argentine politics.
Yeah, and it's from flashing back to my period of time, because Juan Perón went to Spain, spent time in Spain,
Yeah.
and of course, there's the crazy story of the body of Evita.
Yeah,
It got stolen,
Yeah.
it got moved, it got mangled, it
yeah.
got, ultimately, it was crazy. But then his second wife, Isabel, became president. And did your dad talk about her?
Well, there's an interesting reason, the interesting background to that.
Yeah.
That when he came, they had an election. In the elections after he was kicked out, the Peronistas were not enabled to put a candidate. So they'd all vote in blank, and about 50% of all the votes were blank votes. But anyway, eventually, when he came back, the reason that they put her in as vice president was because there were so many factions within the Argentine political parties that they couldn't agree on a candidate to be vice president. And so they put in her, his wife, as the vice president. And of course, she didn't have the political skills or anything else because he died about a year after taking office. So then she became president, and she didn't have the political skills to operate with the many factions that were still operative in Argentina at the time.
And throughout all of this time, your dad and the seminary really were able to operate without political interference because they didn't interfere with politics.
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they didn't see them as a threat?
No. No.
And is it safe to say that Argentina's principally Catholic
Yes.
as a
Yeah,
religion?
very much. Very much. That role has not always been a singular role. For example, the man that's present Pope was an Argentine. He was a Jesuit. And the Jesuits in Argentina were very much to the left in politics. And so they encouraged this liberation theology, which was an attempt to sort of build up the Catholic population to be much more politically present and active and supportive of particularly the lower classes. And there's a certain irony that in 1962, the Pope, who at that time, I forget his name, but he came from Poland. And so he was very supportive of the Polish people becoming liberated, but not with communism. And so there was a good bit of communist influence throughout Latin America in what was called liberation theology. And he came to Latin America in 1962 at a big conference and denounced this liberation theology as being communist inspired, and that the church would not support that. And so that's when this liberation theology began to sort of kind of disappear, because the Pope has said we're not going to have any of that because it's communist inspired. But at the same time, it was very much, I don't know, obviously there was a communist sympathy, but the communism that you had in Latin America was not that identified with Russian communism. It was much more, they didn't feel like they were enemies of Russian communism, but the way their communism was working out, it was working out in very significant ways to improve the life and the conditions of the poor people in Latin America. So you have that tradition coming up. And I'm forgetting what your question was about the role of the Catholic Church.
Right.
Yeah, there was a branch of that Catholic Church that was very supportive of liberation theology. And there was another branch of the church that was not.
Today, Argentina is a democracy. Does it have particularly socialistic leanings? Is it, you get a sense of it now? Do you follow it?
Yeah, I suppose the problem right now is that the factions within Argentine politics and culture are so many, as I say many, 8 or 10, and their inability to work together to achieve certain ends is creating a chaos that is very lamentable. The man that's president now, he's been president, I think, well, not too long, not quite a year yet. He wanted to come in and put in all kinds of very radical reforms. But the truth of it is, he didn't have the political backing to do that, and he still doesn't. And he doesn't have the political skills to work with these various groups to try to get them to coalesce in certain ways to support certain changes. The biggest problem they've had is inflation. It's just, and I mean, to give you some idea of the radical differences, even in inflation, is according to what part of the economy and what issues in the economy you're dealing with, the rate at which you can exchange the dollar for currency varies as much as 50%.
Oh my golly.
So if you're going to go down and do these kind of transactions, then you can buy pesos with these many dollars. But if you're going to do these kind of transactions, then that's going to cost you half as many dollars.
Well,
so it just adds to the general confusion that you have in terms of the way the economy functions, one would have hoped that this current president would have been able to bring some resolution, but it doesn't seem to be coming about in ways that he had anticipated. So it's still, kind of a bubbling mass.
yeah. So last time we talked about Bill Cooper, he was at Baylor, and where he cast his lot, and there he stayed until he retired. And during that time period, were you there when Ken Starr was the president?
I was.
Was that just a little local flavor? Ken Starr sat in a chair where you're sitting about 15 years ago.
Is that right?
He was at Chautauqua, your favorite Chautauqua, and gave a speech. And then the next day, I got an alert at my law office that a guy in a plaid shirt, similar to yours, was down here just taking notes on Jackson. And it was, Judge Starr. Are you kidding me? You had Ken Starr in our Jackson Center. So the next thing you know, boom, we did an interview with Ed Tomasini on a boom boom notice. And then he became, part of our
Good.
stuff here.
Wonderful, yeah.
And I'll say it while I'm thinking about it. Similarly, the first chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court was Luis Moreno Ocampo, also from Argentina.
Yeah.
And he was the first one of the ICC chief prosecutors. And he was here also for a couple of times. So we've had this connection, Baylor, Argentina, all of that stuff. But during Ken Starr's time, there was a little bit of controversy. What was that? I frankly, I was thinking about it today and I couldn't recall.
Yeah. Well, you have to go back in history a little bit. Well, I'll throw in some interesting stories.
Sure.
Because one of the presidents of earlier Baylor was Abner McCall, and he was an attorney, and he had been an executive vice president and then he sort of prepared the way, and then he became president. Well, this was while he was president. We had, there was some legislation that had come up down in Austin, and I was going to go down there and testify to a legislative committee about some issue that had come up with respect to higher education. And while we were all waiting to begin to testify to the committee, McCall's assistant comes up and he says, I wonder if y'all would give us permission to let Judge McCall testify to the committee, because we need to get back to Waco for some obligations we've got there. If y'all let him speak first, we'd appreciate it very much. No one objected. So McCall gets up and he turns over to the committee, who sit around a table over in one corner of the room. And he says, I just want to thank you all for your good work. You've worked hard, you've come up with a good product, and I just thank you very much. And that's all I need to say. Just want to thank you for your good work. So he turns around and heads to the door. And before he gets to the door, the guy on the committee judge says, excuse me, Judge, he says, I have a question I'd like to ask you. Oh, yes, sir, whatever, you know. He says, I want to know, when the hell did you ever come to Austin that you didn't get what you wanted? Because he had a way of working behind the scenes to get stuff done. Well, anyway, back to Ken Starr. The president that succeeded Herbert Reynolds as president was Robert Sloan.
Okay.
And he was there for 10 years. And during his presidency, there were certain factions on the board, and to a certain extent within the faculty, as those that supported what Sloan wanted and those that didn't support what he wanted. And the result of that was there was a good bit of dissension and sort of turmoil within the university community because of that. And the person that succeeded him was John Lilly, who was a Baylor graduate, but he had been president of a university in Nevada. And he came there and he got dropped into a boiling pot because of all the tensions. And so he, at the end of 3 years, they did not renew his contract. Then had another interim president, and then Starr came in. But Starr also inherited this boiling pot that did not really gotten resolved. And his administrative style was he left to his administrative body doing the dirty job of administering the university, and he spent time out doing public relations, raising money and things like this. So what happened was that these issues never really got resolved.
Wasn't there some sort of was there some sort of sports scandal at that time?
Well, that was back.
Maybe I got this.
Yeah, because that was when Starr resigned. That's when they also fired the football coach.
Yeah.
And that was a managed thing. To be sure, I don't know that those sexual things were handled well, but they were handled the same way that everybody else was handling them.
Right.
At the time. But anyway, they wrote this up as if though the head football coach was the one who was fostering all this, which wasn't true at all. I don't even know if he was aware of this going on. He just did the footballing, and he had his administrators who were taking care of everything else. Right. And so, but to make it look like they were really going to the roots of things, they fired him as well as Starr. Yeah. And so then when Starr was terminated, and they did the football coach the same, and then they brought in a new president, which is the current president, Linda Livingstone. And she has a background in management, and she knows how to administer a university.
Right, right.
So she's just doing a great job.
Yeah.
She's been able to handle all the tensions and address the issues and do that properly. And it's been wonderful to see the changes that she has brought about.
I love your accent. You still have it.
Yes.
Mississippi, Texas, you still have it. You all. During that time period that you grew up, and being from Mississippi, another just local personal vignette, for a couple of days, we had James Meredith, who stayed with us,
Yeah.
with me. And so he was part of the Jackson Center, and that story at the University of Mississippi. Was the Baptist, Southern Baptist, of which you were part, the civil rights aspect of it, was now your dad's obviously in Argentina, your mom's in Argentina, you're kind of here, but
Yeah.
still Baptist.
Yeah.
Was that part of your world?
Very much,
Yeah.
very much. Mostly, it was mostly during the time that I was in school. And so I was very much more involved in trying to pass my courses than I was demonstrating on the part of various civil rights issues. And the truth of it is that Waco really wasn't a center
Right.
of civil rights activities and demonstrations and everything else. There was a good bit of activity behind the scenes, but it never got to be a public issue.
Right.
But you might say that one of the things that I had learned when I was in Argentina was steer clear of getting politically involved because you don't know what's at stake here.
Right.
And so, although I had my views, I was not particularly vocal, or I didn't go out and participate. For one reason, I was working, putting my way through school, and between the work and those classes, I didn't have time left over to go out and demonstrate anywhere. But those were increasingly issues about which you were very much concerned, and you were hoping for changes would come about.
Right.
And in fact, I can remember this past year that I attended a banquet that was celebrating Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday or something. And we had a banquet there, about 200 people, and the interaction among them of all racial and ethnic background, it was just as comfortable as you could be.
Sure.
That people were very much at home with it. And it dawned on me 50 years ago, this wouldn't have happened.
Right, right, right.
So it helped me to see that back in that day when I was there, there was this sort of, you didn't have this interaction. Well, there weren't any Black African Americans on there. So those changes had come about over the last 50 years. And Baylor has just done an excellent job of that now. In fact, about 40% of their enrollment now is minorities. So it's they haven't made a lot of noise about this, but you've gone behind the scenes and brought in a lot of people of other ethnic cultures, not only in the U.S. but from around the world. If I'm over on campus when classes are, changing from one thing to another, and I'm walking among the students, it's not out of the ordinary for me to hear 4 or 5 different foreign languages being spoken by different student groups.
Yes.
So there's a lot of international as well as national absorbing of different groups and heritages.
Are you an emeritus down there, Bill? Are you an emeritus at Baylor?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have classes at all?
No, well, I tell you, I retired in 2002, but I continued to teach in one of the programs for the next 17 years.
Wow.
So I only retired officially about 5 years ago.
Yeah. What were you teaching? What was your principal course,
I mean, in these last,
many years, yeah.
last retirement, well, there was I continued to teach one course in philosophy, one in Latin American philosophy, and one in Oriental philosophy, Hinduism and Buddhism, and Chinese thought. Then there was a course in a program called the Medical Humanities, which was intended as a minor for people going into medicine, whether it's doctors, nurses, or therapists, or whatever. And I really enjoyed working with that group because they were very good students. They worked real hard, and they were very open. And what we were trying to do in that program was to help them to see and appreciate the culture from which the patients of the doctors and nurses would come from, and to see them as human beings and how to work with them in the context of their humanity to bring about healthiness in body and soul.
Curious about the medical philosophy, but did you also get into the medical ethics part of it also?
Yes, you do.
And in our crazy world, again, the Jackson Center, one of the principal cases after the war was the case against the doctors, Nazi doctors, which led to the first time articulation of what we now know as informed consent, the code of ethics that you sign when you say you want elective surgery, really was articulated then. Curious, did that ever come up, the Nuremberg Code, in your studies at all?
Not as such. I don't remember addressing that particular legal issue, but the curriculum that we developed in that program was one that was geared toward helping those going into the profession to be sensitive to these dimensions, and to keep an eye and an ear open for the changes that were occurring in the culture, particularly in the light of the changes that were occurring within the medical profession as well.
Right.
Because there have been any number of changes, and those changes will continue to occur. And one of the difficulties that you will have as a professional medical person is the technology that comes into play, such that you almost don't see this patient as a human being, but he's a person that's got such and such a thing, and what kind of technology do I apply to get that taken care of, and you don't pay as much attention as you should to who this person is as a human being and how they're struggling with their own health problems. You've
been in the world of philosophy for well over 60 years, maybe? Has there been a change in the emphasis within the study itself of philosophy, where you've noticed that certain, well, it's morphed into certain areas of philosophy, changed over time? Can you see that kind of change?
Well, the basic change that has occurred, and particularly on the graduate level of philosophy, is that it has become much more what's called analytic philosophy, which focuses primarily on the meaning of terms and the nature of the argument, which, if you stop to think about it, is how you know. But it's taken a rather narrow perspective on that. And so the issues with respect to the metaphysics and issues with respect to ethics don't really come up as such, because you get hung up on how you clarify the meaning of your terms, and can you trace this meaning back to some particular sensuous experience. And then the other is, when you argue, can you argue with the precision that you can demonstrate in symbolic logic, which is mathematical, basically, reasoning. And so as a result, the concern of philosophers for major issues in the society has tended to decrease significantly. so that they don't get involved in that. They just say, that's just a bunch of people mouthing off stuff that they don't understand, so why should I get involved? And there's been a sort of a pullback nationally
Right.
on the part of philosophers from getting engaged in trying to address the issues and how do you go about solving problems within a larger political and cultural context. That has been the major change that I have seen. Well, I can remember in earlier days you had any number of major people in philosophy who were also major figures in discussing national issues. But you don't find that, at least I haven't been able to find them recently.
Is that encouraging or discouraging to
Very
you?
discouraging.
Yeah.
Very discouraging, yeah. Because even though the philosophers themselves are not politicians, sometimes they can help you clarify what the issues are and to be able to weigh the evidence and help you work toward solutions that will benefit who we are as human beings. And I think the lack of a voice to sort of say, well, let's take enough time to sort of sit back and listen to each other and do the best we can to understand the complexity of the issues we face so that we can arrive at decisions that will end up to the benefit of all of us.
Did you have a role model?
Well, the one that certainly comes to mind is the man that was the chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Baylor, a fellow named Jack Kilgore. And he was one of the most skilled men that I ever ran into that could help address social and political issues. I mean, he just knew how to kind of calm things down enough to where you could listen to yourself
Right.
as well as to your opponent and sort of get a little bit more of an idea of what the issues were and how you go about thinking this through. There have been any number of other national figures, names of which slip me right now. Given my age, I don't make any excuses for that. But they did have Richard Rorty was one. He had a national presence in terms of discussing national issues.
Right.
And there were several others as well that had important roles in at least engaging in the dialogue that all of us need to engage in as we work toward national solutions.
Well, aside from the national solutions, I'm just curious what it was like at the home front. You know, you and your wife sitting down and having a conversation. Did you have to have? Did she persuade you more than you persuaded her?
Well, I think we enlightened each other more than tried to persuade each other. My wife had a background she grew up as a missionary kid in Brazil.
Ah.
So there's a great deal of similarity in the cultures and in the rearing, so that when we got together, it was like we'd shared our childhood, even though we hadn't known each other as children. But that it did, I think, help us to understand the complexity of the issues that we faced as faculty members there at Baylor, and the complexity of the issues that our children would face when they grew up.
Yeah.
And our older son, as a matter of fact, when he settled into his career, he ended up teaching math because he had majored in history. And then he saw that there was an opportunity to teach overseas. But to teach overseas, you had to have 2 years' experience in this country. And if he's going to teach history, he's going to have to also coach basketball or football. And he didn't particularly want to do either one of those. He had played tennis when he was in high school. And so he found out that if he could get a teaching field in math, they would never ask him to coach anything. So that's what he did. And he ended up teaching in Paraguay and Saudi Arabia and Bangladesh. And right now he's teaching in Miami. So he's had a good bit of exposure internationally
Sure.
to that. And I have a daughter, and she's a pastor in North Carolina. Then I have a son who's also a computer engineer. He lives in Austin. And he's not particularly engaged in international affairs. But I think it has made a difference in terms of the perspective and the openness that you have to those who come to you and you try to work things out with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you speak Spanish or Portuguese at home?
Well, I spoke Spanish. My Spanish, Portuguese and Spanish are similar enough to where you can understand them. You can understand if they speak slowly and you can ask a question here and there. You can understand each other.
My son-in-law is from Brazil, and when his mother comes up, and she does speak Portuguese, and I speak a little Spanish. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You got to say, slow down,
Yeah.
and maybe we'll catch up.
There's an interesting story. Back when I was a kid, one of the missionary families there was related to a missionary family in Brazil. And so they had their younger son, who was about 5 years old, and was going up to see his grandmother for the first time. And so as he's going into the room where she is, she begins to speak to him in Portuguese. And he stops halfway across the room and he's turned to his mother and he says, "But grandmother speaks Spanish so badly."
I understand that too. Oh, my golly. So how'd you find yourself at Chautauqua, Bill? I mean, you've been there for 60-some years, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, the reason for that was, to give you the whole story, there was a merchant in Galveston, Texas, the latter part of the 19th century, the 1800s. Because Galveston was a major port of entry into the western U.S. because they didn't have bridges across the river. And so he did very well in his store there. And he had 2 daughters and a son. And the 2 daughters, because their father was enabled it, moved up to New York City to live life. And so come to find out that in New York, in the late 1800s, they heard about Chautauqua. So they came out to Chautauqua and just fell in love with it and were very, very active in the various organizations at the institution. And so they built a house there. In fact, they built 2 houses there. And they left those houses to their niece. That was my wife's second cousin that lived in Waco. So when we moved to Waco in 1965, this second cousin of my wife's took us in and was good friends of us and invited us to come up with her to Chautauqua in 1966 for the first time. So we've been coming up ever since. And she ended up leaving us her house. We remodeled that house. Enjoyed being in it.
Well, we're delighted you are here, and you stumble onto the Price family, and the next thing you
yes.
know, you have Tom and Norm, and they just make sure that
That's right.
I get a chance to meet you. As I know we're really taxing your time, what's the question I should be asking Bill Cooper? You know, if your family were listening to this right now, this video, and they were said, "Gee, Greg, you should have asked Bill this question," what should I have asked you?
I don't know of any one question, but maybe 14 or 15.
Well, give me a sample.
I think one of them that's relevant is what have been the changes in my religious perspective over the years.
Yeah.
Because I was reared in a fairly conservative religious environment, and not only religious but cultural environment. And I would say that's one of the issues. And in what ways has your religious perspective changed over the years? That's one question.
And what would your answer be?
Oh, what I say is it's continuing to change. One of the experiences that I had as a student at Baylor, a class I was taking, the professor was summarizing what a lecturer had said the day before to the faculty, the lecture to the faculty. And I don't remember anything he said except this one line. He said, "Jesus didn't come to save Western culture." When he said that, it's like I pulled the string and all my intellectual clothes fell off, because I realized that I had conceived of Christianity solely in terms of Western culture, political processes and economy and all the rest. And I just wondered that doesn't work for the Chinese, doesn't work for the Indians. And so as I began to grope around to find a different intellectual context, it was almost an obsessive search for the kind of intellectual environment that would enable the formulation of what your Christian tradition is in such a way as not to give offense to your culture. And back in those days, I don't know if you ever remember, there was a book published called North Toward Home. It was written by a fellow that was a graduate of the University of Texas in Austin, and he was talking about his pilgrimage as a student of trying to outgrow that Texas enclosure. And so it was a pilgrimage very similar to what I was undergoing, and I'm still undergoing. So I'd say that's the major, and of course what it does is it desanctifies all of your theological arguments and concepts. They just know those concepts are no longer the absolutes in terms of which you have to understand God. God surpasses whatever idea you want to come up about who God is and how God works, how God's present. So I think that's one of the major steps that's occurred in my religious change. The other is it come about more recently when I realized that the biblical writings are embedded in the Hebrew tradition. And the church in its development is embedded in the Greek tradition, the Greek philosophical tradition, coming mainly out of Plato and Aristotle. And so I begin to ponder, how these two traditions interact. And it dawned on me that from the Hebrew tradition, the fundamental reality are your relationships, your relationship to God and to each other. And that the relationships are never fixed. They're never finished. They're always in the process of developing. There's always more glory ahead, more openness, more genuineness, more insight into the quality that builds these relationships and strengthens them. And that you never do have the intellectual ability to be able to nail something down and say, this is exactly what it is, and it be that. And so the role of the mind is more to help in your clarifying and in your pilgrimage, and not, as it were, to nail down the answers once for all.
Right.
And so I would say that would be a very brief summary of my changes in my religious perspective. I still go to church every Sunday and enjoy it very much. The worship services here at Chautauqua are wonderfully integrated and open and affirming. And then I have enjoyed those very much. And the same is true of the church that I go to in Waco.
Mhm.
It's just a very open and affirming and rigorously challenging religious environment. And the same is true of Baylor. Baylor, although it wants to sort of make sure that the conservative element doesn't come in to try to take them over, is a marvelously open and affirming and genuine community of learning. It's just very, very good. One that I appreciate very much having been part of. Well, that would be one question that I would say this crowd around me would want to pursue with some interest.
Yeah. Are there another one at top of mind?
Well, I think the other one has to do, it's sort of related in a way, it has to do with how do we give structure to the political and economic and social processes such that we stay in touch with the changes that are occurring in our culture and the realities that you're trying to face as a society in terms of making sure that people get enough to eat, get the health care they need, have opportunities to learn and to grow and develop, and to participate in the political processes in meaningful ways. Those would be issues about which they would want me to be, well, what do you got to say about this? Now that you've gotten out of the stars of your theological and philosophical ponderings, how do you deal with everyday life?
Mm-hmm.
And so these have also been very interesting ways to explore new ways of understanding the world, because it's continuously changing, and we're having to adapt to new realities. This artificial intelligence is bringing challenges to how we communicate, what we accept as the case. All things like this that are very germane and have significant impact on what things will be like 10 years from now.
I feel like I just had a master's course here, and this is just remarkable, Bill. I didn't know what to expect sitting down with you. I knew that I would know that I would not cry for Argentina. I would evoke Evita.
Yeah.
And wow, this has been a spectacular asset. And do you interact much with the Department of Religion at Chautauqua?
Not in the last few years.
Okay.
There was that one season when they just canceled everything.
Right.
And then they've been kind of growing back, and this season was a very excellent program this year. And I haven't got acquainted yet with the new director of the religion department, but I'll take care of that next year.
Something to look forward to. As I look forward to catching up with you again.
We're good.
And our next stop will be at a ball game.
Okay.
Down there. We'll see the Jamestown Tarp Skunks. Well, Bill, thank you so much.
Well, it's certainly been my pleasure.
My
My pleasure.
Just